Thomas stepped lightly across the warped floorboards, the air heavy with the oppressive scent of salt and decay. The hotel, a labyrinth of shifting shadows and whispered memories, seemed to pulse around him, a living mausoleum of lost souls. Each corridor stretched and contracted, walls rippling like waves caught in some spectral tide. As he moved forward, the peeling wallpaper flickered with an unearthly glow, revealing faint portraits of a sorrowful man whose eyes bore the weight of an unbearable grief. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. These images, scattered throughout the hotel, felt like echoes of a past that refused to die, like fragments of a story begging to be told. He paused in a dimly lit lounge where time seemed to fold upon itself. The once grand room was now a ruin of cracked mahogany furniture and dust-choked air. On a table, half buried beneath debris, lay a leather-bound journal, its edges singed as if caught in a fire long extinguished. With trembling hands, Thomas opened it. The pages inside were yellowed and fragile, filled with cramped, anguished handwriting. The diary belonged to the hotel's original owner, a man consumed by sorrow after the loss of his beloved wife. His words bled desperation, confessions of loneliness, haunting dreams, and a growing madness that culminated in a curse bound not just to the building, but to the very souls who gazed upon it. The silence was punctuated only by the distant roar of the sea and the creaking bones of the ancient structure. Thomas's fingers traced the lines of the text, each phrase a thread weaving him tighter into the hotel's dark tapestry. A shiver ran down his spine as a sudden movement caught his eye. At the edge of the room, ghostly figures shimmered like mist, their translucent forms flickering in and out of focus. Their eyes, wide with longing and regret, locked onto his. Soft whispers rose around him, a chorus of lost souls murmuring names and memories, pleading for release from their eternal torment. Driven by a mixture of dread and determination, Thomas followed the spectral voices to a section of the floor where a knot-shaped emblem was carved into the rotting wood. The symbol, a tangled loop with no beginning or end, seemed to throb with a cold, unnatural energy. As he laid his palm upon it, the room brightened suddenly, flooded with a warm, golden light that chased back the shadows. It was a fleeting moment, but for Thomas, it ignited a fragile hope that the curse, however ancient and malevolent, might be undone. The hotel seemed to breathe around him, its walls whispering secrets of nostalgia and despair, of souls snared by their own longing. Yet within that suffocating sorrow, Thomas found a glimmer, a path illuminated by the original owner's tragic story and the symbolic imagery woven into the hotel's very fabric. His obsession, once a source of isolation and fear, now spurred him onward with renewed purpose. If he could decipher the full meaning of these symbols and the diary's cryptic entries, perhaps he could chart a course to redemption, to breaking the cycle of vanished lives and haunted memories. But as the warmth faded and the hotel's shadows crept back, Thomas knew the path ahead was fraught with peril. The malevolent presence would not relinquish its hold easily. Still, armed with knowledge and a flicker of hope, he pressed deeper into the heart of the haunted edifice, each step echoing with the whispers of those lost and the promise of salvation just beyond the veil. This fragile hope was a candle in the darkness, a light Thomas clung to as the hotel's shifting corridors twisted ever more unnervingly around him. The line between past and present blurred, memories tangled with spectral visions, and the weight of nostalgia threatened to crush his resolve. Yet the discovery of the emblem and the diary's revelations marked a turning point. For the first time, Thomas glimpsed a way through the nightmare, a chance to sever the curse's grip and free the souls imprisoned in this liminal prison. And so, with cautious heart and steady hand, Thomas ventured onward, the flickering hope in his chest a fragile flame against the encroaching shadows. The weight of nostalgia pressed down on Thomas' graves like a tangible force, heavier than the damp sea air that hung perpetually over the coastal town. He sat hunched over the battered library table, the flickering candlelight casting long, wavering shadows across the yellowed letters, and faded photographs strewn before him. The scent of old paper, mingled with the faint salt tang wafting from the cracked window, filled the cramped space. Outside, the restless sea whispered ceaselessly, as if echoing the endless yearning embedded in the town's history. Thomas's fingers trembled as he traced the edges of a photograph, its surface worn smooth by time and handling. The image was deceptively simple, a group of smiling faces posed before the hotel, their eyes bright with life, framed by a sky smeared with a melancholic twilight hue. But the photo was no mere record of a moment. It was a gateway, a frozen memory that trapped more than just a scene. It held the lingering essence of those who had vanished, caught forever in a loop of longing and despair. His mind flickered unbidden to his own loss, the friend whose disappearance had ignited his obsession. The hotel, always present in the background of that final photograph, was more than a building, it was a prison of memory itself. And the deeper Thomas delved, the clearer it became that the hotel's curse fed not just on the flesh or spirit of its victims, but on their nostalgic attachments, the irreplaceable moments, the longing for what was lost or could never be reclaimed. Lost in thought, Thomas barely noticed the soft footsteps approaching until a familiar voice broke the silence. "You were chasing ghosts in more ways than one," Evelyn Marsh said gently, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Her eyes, magnified by delicate spectacles, held a steady, empathetic sadness. She wore a vintage shawl that seemed to carry the weight of decades, and the flickering candlelight caught the strands of silver woven through her dark hair. Evelyn settled beside him, her voice dropping to a whisper as she recounted the tale of her ancestors, townsfolk who had long been entwined with the hotel's dark legacy. "They say the hotel isn't just a place," she murmured. "It's a living memory, a vessel for every sorrow, every lost hope. Those who step too close can't help but be pulled in, caught in the currents of their own longing." Thomas listened, the words resonating deeply within him. The idea that nostalgia itself could be a snare, a lure that twisted love and memory into chains, was both terrifying and heartbreaking. It explained the spectral presence in the photographs, the way the hotel seemed to breathe and shift, feeding on the emotional residue left behind. Later, standing alone on the shoreline as dusk blurred across the sky in bruised purples and deepening blues, Thomas clutched the faded photograph tighter. The hotel loomed ghost-like on the horizon, a silhouette etched against the dying light. The gentle lap of waves at his feet was a cruel reminder of time's indifferent passage. The invisible chains of memory tightened around him, threatening to pull him under into the same endless longing that had ensnared so many before. Back in his room, the boundary between reality and nightmare blurred. Suddenly, spectral figures swirled around him, faces half-remembered, voices whispering names and regrets that echoed in the hollow spaces of his mind. The air thickened, cold and suffocating, as the hotel's cruel embrace reached through the veil, seeking to claim him. Thomas fought to hold on to his sanity, grappling with the seductive despair that tempted him to surrender. Each whispered memory was a thread weaving a tapestry of sorrow and loss that threatened to consume him entirely. Yet within that darkness flickered a fragile ember of resolve, a determination to break free, to pierce the veil of nostalgia and shatter the curse that bound so many souls. As the night deepened, Thomas realized that the hotel's power lay not only in its supernatural malevolence, but in the very human emotions it preyed upon. To defeat it, he would have to confront not just the entity, but the painful memories within himself, the weight of nostalgia, and the aching void left by loss. The chapter closed with Thomas staring out into the encroaching darkness, the hotel's silhouette etched faintly against the horizon. The battle was far from over, but armed with new understanding, he prepared to face the shadows within and without, knowing that the past was a prison he might yet escape or become forever trapped inside. The corridor stretched before Thomas like a narrowing vein, its walls coated in peeling wallpaper that whispered secrets in the low moan of the coastal wind. As he stepped forward, the air thickened, charged with a presence unseen but palpably close. Then, faintly, voices soft, fractured, like shards of distant conversations drifted through the gloom. Thomas paused, his breath catching in his throat. The whispers were not random. They formed words, fragmented but laden with sorrow. Please, remember. A voice trembled, barely audible. Another echoed, lost. Can't leave. The voices wove around him, a tapestry of despair spun from the souls imprisoned within this spectral edifice. Thomas's heart pounded as he realized these were not mere echoes of the past, but active calls for recognition, cries for liberation. Drawn deeper, Thomas entered a room where the dim light revealed a figure, a young woman, translucent and shimmering faintly, her eyes pools of infinite regret. She reached toward him, fingers stretched as if to grasp a lifeline. Her lips moved soundlessly, mouthing words he could not hear, yet the weight of her sorrow pressed heavily upon him. He wanted to speak, to comfort, but the gulf between worlds was vast and cold. As the apparition faded, Thomas felt a chill snake down his spine, a reminder of the hotel's malevolent hunger. He moved on, finding himself in a once grand parlor where the walls seemed to breathe with memories. Ghostly scenes played out, a man clutching a photograph, a child running toward a door that never opened, a woman sobbing in eternal silence. Each tableau was a fragment of a trapped soul's final moments, endlessly replayed in a loop of despair and nostalgia. The hotel, Thomas understood, was no mere building but a prison of memories, a liminal space where time twisted and grief congealed into a dark force. It fed on these emotions, growing stronger with each lost soul it claimed. The depths of its cruelty lay not just in captivity, but in the endless torment of reliving loss, the inability to move beyond the past's cruel hold. Suddenly the air grew colder still. A chorus of voices rose, weaving together in a crescendo of anguished lament that reverberated through the halls and into Thomas's very bones. Overwhelmed, he staggered, the weight of their collective despair pressing down, threatening to crush his spirit. Yet within the despair, a clarity emerged, an understanding that only by facing these stories, these regrets, could the curse be confronted. Thomas steadied himself, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill. He had glimpsed the soul's suffering, their endless yearning for release. Their pain was the key, their stories the lantern to guide him through the hotel's labyrinthine curse. But with that knowledge came a peril. The more he connected with them, the more vulnerable he became to their sorrow. Gathering his resolve, Thomas whispered into the shadows, "I see you. I hear you. I will find a way to free you." The voices softened, a fragile hope threading through their mournful tones. Yet in the silence that followed, the hotel seemed to pulse alive, watching, waiting. The fight was far from over, but Thomas now carried a new weapon, the truth of the lost soul's stories, and the fierce determination to break the cycle of despair. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, carrying with it the endless echoes of those trapped between worlds. And Thomas, standing alone amid the spectral shadows, knew that the path ahead would demand everything he had and more. The hotel's curse was cruel and relentless, but so was his will. The echoes of the lost were no longer just whispers. They were a summons. And Thomas Graves would answer. The air inside the hotel grew thick, as if time itself had congealed into a palpable fog that pressed against Thomas Graves' chest. He stepped cautiously through the shifting corridors, the walls bending and undulating like the surface of a disturbed pond. With every footfall, the very fabric of reality seemed to tremble, folding and unfolding upon itself in impossible ways. The hotel, a decrepit structure in the waking world, here revealed its true nature, a liminal prison where past, present, and future coalesced into a fractured maze. Thomas's breath hitched as a corridor stretched endlessly before him, the ceiling dissolving into a roiling gray sky. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, whispering in voices that were at once familiar and alien. He pressed forward, his pulse quickening with a mixture of dread and desperate curiosity. Ahead, the walls shimmered like a heat wave, and Thomas found himself drawn into a dimly lit room. There, the air hung heavy with the scent of salt and old wood, a spectral reenactment unfolding before him. The hotel's original owner, a gaunt man with hollow eyes, stood at the edge of a grand window, gazing out over the storm-tossed sea. His face twisted with despair, a silent scream etched into his features as memories of loss and betrayal consumed him. Thomas watched, breathless, as the man's anguish seemed to seep into the very walls, binding the curse that held the hotel and all its trapped souls in a timeless snare. Shaken, Thomas moved on, the corridor now bending and twisting unpredictably. He rounded a corner and found himself in a lounge that defied logic. The furniture flickered between the elegant style of a bygone era and the peeling decay of neglect. In the half-light, a figure emerged, himself, but younger, with clear eyes full of hope and determination. Thomas, the apparition whispered, voice trembling with urgency, "Do not surrender to the darkness that consumes this place. Your obsession is a path to ruin. Remember who you are." The specter of his former self reached out, fingers trembling as if trying to grasp something intangible. Thomas's throat tightened, a bitter mixture of sorrow and longing flooding his chest. The encounter was fleeting. The youthful Thomas dissipated like mist, leaving behind the cold silence of the hotel. Continuing deeper into the shifting maze, Thomas came upon a massive shattered mirror, its fractured surface reflecting countless, distorted images of himself. Each reflection bore a different expression: fear, regret, confusion, capturing moments from his past and possible futures he dared not imagine. The cacophony of voices echoed in his mind, fragmented memories and warnings colliding with raw emotion. The disorienting tableau overwhelmed him. He staggered back, heart pounding. The hotel's cursed presence was no longer just an external threat. It had begun to invade his very mind, warping his perception of reality. From the depths of the hotel came a haunting chorus, the whispers of lost souls entwined in the fabric of the place. Their voices layered together, a mournful symphony of regret and longing that filled the endless hallways. Thomas felt their sorrow press against his skin, a cold weight that threatened to crush his resolve. Yet amid the despair, a fragile thread of hope flickered within him. He realized that understanding the fractured nature of time within the hotel might be key to breaking the curse. But the path was perilous. The more he embraced the spectral truths, the closer he came to losing himself entirely. With a trembling hand, Thomas pressed forward, the hotel's shadows closing in around him. The fractured time held many secrets yet, and to uncover them all, he would have to confront not only the darkness within the hotel, but the darkness within himself. As the corridors twisted into impossible shapes and the whispers grew louder, Thomas' voice barely escaped his lips. "I will not become another lost soul. I will find the truth, no matter the cost." And with that, the hotel seemed to shudder, as if acknowledging his defiance, the boundaries of time fracturing further still in response. The corridor stretched before Thomas in oppressive silence, the faint glow of his flashlight wavering as the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Each step echoed hollowly, swallowed almost instantly by the vast emptiness of the hotel's forgotten wing. The air was thick, heavy with a dampness that clung to his skin, and a low, mournful wail drifted from somewhere deep within the building's bones, tugging at the edges of his sanity. Thomas swallowed hard, his breath visible in the chill that had settled like a weight around his chest. He could feel it now, an unbearable sorrow that seemed to seep from the very walls, an ancient grief that had been festering here long before any of the recent disappearances. It was as if the hotel itself was alive, breathing despair into the shadows. He pressed on, every nerve screaming in protest as the corridor narrowed, walls bending subtly as if the building were folding in on itself. Then, from the darkness ahead, a figure began to coalesce, a gaunt man with hollow, sunken eyes that burned with a sorrow so profound it almost crushed Thomas under its weight. The apparition was translucent yet painfully vivid, the edges of his form flickering like a candle flame, caught in a cold draft. Thomas's heart pounded, his mind racing to place the figure. The stories he had uncovered spoke of the hotel's original owner, a man broken by loss, whose despair had cursed the very foundation of the place. This was the source of the hotel's malevolence, the wellspring of the endless cycle of vanished souls. "Why do you linger?" Thomas asked, his voice trembling yet steady. "What binds you here?" The spectral figure's mouth opened, but no words emerged, only a wave of raw emotion that slammed into Thomas like a physical blow. Memories not his own flooded his mind, a young woman's laughter fading into silence, a child's face blurring into shadows, a home swallowed by darkness. The weight of these recollections pressed down on Thomas's heart, dredging up his own buried grief, the loss he had tried so desperately to bury. For a moment, Thomas faltered, the despair threatening to pull him under. The hotel whispered promises of release through oblivion, tempting him to surrender to the nightmare of nostalgia and loss. But somewhere deep inside, a defiant spark ignited. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe through the suffocating sorrow. "I will not become like you," he said, voice growing stronger. "I refuse to be consumed by this place." The apparition recoiled, the shadows around it flickering wildly as if disturbed by Thomas's resolve. A torrent of spectral anguish surged forth, but Thomas stood firm, anchoring himself to the fragments of clarity he had fought so hard to hold onto. Slowly the figure began to waver, its form unraveling into mist that dissipated into the stale air. Exhausted, Thomas sank to the floor, the weight of the encounter threatening to overwhelm him. Yet beneath the crushing sorrow, there was a glimmer of hope, the first real sign that the hotel's grip might be weakening. As he gathered himself, the oppressive silence returned, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the shore. The hotel still held its secrets, its curses, but Thomas had taken a crucial step into the depths of despair and lived to tell the tale. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since arriving, Thomas felt the tide turning. Somewhere beyond the shadows, a fragile path to redemption awaited. He rose shakily to his feet, steeling himself for the trials to come. The hotel's darkness was vast, but so was his resolve. And as he moved forward, the specter of loss no longer held him hostage, it had become the fuel for his fight. Outside, the mist curled around the hotel's faded silhouette, a silent sentinel watching, waiting. But in the heart of the cursed edifice, a flicker of light pierced the gloom, small, fragile, but undeniably there. And Thomas Graves would follow it, no matter the cost. The oppressive silence of the hotel corridor was punctuated only by the faint groans of the old building, as if it were breathing in and out with a slow, mournful rhythm. Thomas Graves stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the faded portrait hanging crookedly on the peeling wallpaper. The painting, worn by time and neglect, depicted a stern-faced man in Victorian attire, the original owner of the hotel, whose despair had, Thomas now understood, cursed this place and ensnared countless souls. The image flickered subtly, as if the very air around it quivered. Thomas felt the familiar tug of the hotel's malevolent presence pressing against his mind, threatening to dissolve the fragile barrier between reality and nightmare. Yet, amidst the swirling shadows and distant whispers, a single thought anchored him: understanding the past was his only salvation. He exhaled slowly, steadying his racing heart. Around him, the walls seemed to breathe, the faded wallpaper rippling like waves caught in a tempest. But Thomas reached out, pressing his palm flat against the cold, cracked plaster. A warmth bloomed beneath his hand, steady and real, defying the spectral chill that filled the room. It was a small beacon in the encroaching darkness, a tangible proof that amidst the shifting terror, some part of this place remained steady. Encouraged, Thomas sank to the floor, brushing dust and debris aside to reveal a battered leather-bound journal. The pages, yellowed and brittle, whispered secrets with every creak as he turned them carefully. Scrawled entries told of the hotel owner's descent into despair, the curse that twisted time and memory within these walls. and hints of a ritual to break the bond between the living and the lost. Each word was a thread in the tangled web of the hotel's history, and Thomas clung to them as desperately as he did to the warmth beneath his hand. The hotel was no longer just a haunted ruin. It was a liminal space, a prison of nostalgia and grief, but also a place vulnerable to understanding and challenge. As he pieced together the cryptic message, the room around him shifted again. Ghostly figures flickered at the edge of his vision, lost souls reaching out with silent pleas. Thomas's breath hitched, but he forced himself to focus, clutching tightly to the journal and the warmth that grounded him. His fingers brushed against something cold and metallic on the floor. Lifting it, he found a rusted key, its intricate design hinting at significance beyond mere decoration. This key, he realized with a surge of hope and dread, was the physical manifestation of the anchor. He had found a link to the past and a possible means to break free. The hotel seemed to sense his resolve, and the shadows recoiled slightly, as if reluctant to release their hold. Thomas stood slowly, the weight of the key heavy in his hand, but light in his heart. The path ahead was fraught with peril and uncertainty, but for the first time since he stepped into this nightmare, he glimpsed a way out. Outside, the mist clung thickly to the crumbling facade, but inside, amidst the shifting illusions and haunting memories, a glimmer of clarity shone, a fragile, flickering light in the darkness. Thomas Graves would hold on to it, no matter the cost. And so, with renewed determination, he stepped forward, ready to face whatever horrors awaited, driven by the hope that knowledge and will could shatter even the most ancient curses. The hotel's secrets were beginning to unravel, and Thomas was the key to unlocking them.